he wasn't in the meeting. Yeah. Haley might just be having a brief sort of final word with the external evaluators. Don't know. And Manuela as well, I think might join us for this meeting.
Heidi, do you mind reminding us about the focus of today's meeting?
Yeah, sure, I can do that while we wait for some other colleagues to join. I can't remember the date, but we had a first sort of meeting back later in 2024 to bring together colleagues from the CS Hub and the R4I Hub. And at that moment, we were actually talking through the work that's happening in the working groups, but recognizing that we're all sort of part of this program delivery team. Are we delivering it? Are we chasing after it? Hard to know sometimes, but but that we're all responsible for different aspects of the work. It's good to connect, and especially for POs to know how their projects are engaging with the hubs, and the opportunities that might be there for those projects as well to take advantage of. So today the idea is to hear an update from our colleagues at the CS Hub, understand what they're up to, ask any questions, and also see if they have any questions for us, with the idea that next week would also be a chance to hear more from our R4I Hub colleagues, go through sort of a similar exercise. And really and what I said to Joel and Elena, this isn't us like scrutinizing their work. It's a chance to understand it better, to hear how we connect, how our partners are connecting, and just kind of make sure we can discuss if there's areas where we need to collaborate or coordinate better. And we might want to spend a little bit of time at the end to touch base around adaptation futures or CLARE exchange, those activities that we are sort of actively looking to coordinate on. Yeah, does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Yeah, that does make sense. Thank you for that background context.
Thanks, Bruce. November 20th. Yes, time has flown. Before we kick off, Haley, I think I thought that Adele was going to join, but it might be that the meeting is going too late, and I see that we're recording. So worst case scenario, do you want to come in, Haley?
Yeah, she did accept, so I can send her a note and see if she can still join. But yeah, let's record. I think we should probably go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. So at this point, is there anyone that hasn't met Alana or Joel yet? Our colleague Arnaud is joining from the grant administration team. He's sitting in our Dakar office. You might not have had the chance to interact with him before. But otherwise, I think we can turn it over to Joel and Alana. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joel. Shall I kick it off? We have actually prepared some slides, which I will try to share. I had some difficulties the last time, so let's see if this works. 1 second. Do you see it okay? Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Because last time I was in presenter mode and I didn't know how to change that, but okay, here we go. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us and opening these different opportunities for exchange and like streamlining efforts. So what we will talk or like give an update about today is the seasonal school, which will be actually happening next week or starting next week on Monday. Then on the responsive fund and the GEI funding, then our activities that we have planned in view of labs approaches across CLARE. And then also talking about the partnership health check that we have done as PA acts or pacts, and what we have envisioned for like the CS Hub 2.0 in a way that was extensively discussed during our in-person meeting that we had in late January, which was an amazing opportunity for the whole team to come together. Bruce also joined us for a day. And yeah, that was an amazing opportunity to meet everyone in person. And yeah, just like do some planning together, some relationship building, etc. So that was an amazing opportunity. And we spent lovely 3 days in Nairobi. Then, like Joao, will talk a little bit later more about what was discussed during that meeting, but maybe starting with the seasonal school and giving you a little bit of an overview who is participating and what we have planned. So the seasonal school is targeting early career researchers, and now we have 41 participants coming from 22 projects. We actually had around 70 applications, so the interest was quite big. And then we had a selection process where we looked a little bit into having representatives from different projects, but also looking into who has not yet participated in a capacity strengthening activity to have like equal opportunities for a variety of people. And then also looking into gender balance, etc. And basically also, in case there were more applicants from one project, we also consulted the CS focal points or sometimes also the PI to also like streamline with them who would be best placed to participate. Overall, the topic is about critical thinking and collaborative research. Some of the thematic focuses will be on data collection, inclusive stakeholder engagement, and communication and dissemination of results. These topics were put together because we had sent out, or like it was part of the application process, that the ECRs themselves actually indicate what topics are interesting for them. And then we had a moment of like shifting and consolidating, etc., that it was narrowed down and more or less to these topics that are mentioned here. Also policy influencing will be a part of it. And then we have the pleasure to also co-designing with other colleagues from other projects, for example, from palm trees to Vopamuja, Urbanize, and Basin. So it's quite a collaborative effort on several ends. We have planned for a mixture of different modalities. Some are more instructional, experiential, and relational. For example, the second day will be quite input heavy, so to say, because it will focus on different methods for data collection. So we have put that more in the like skill development section. So we will have different experts joining us, and yeah, talking about and like teaching about these different methods, but also combining it with more interactive approaches such as games. Also, we will have peer-led clinics where like the ECRs themselves can like ask questions and also support each other. And they will also be engaging in mini projects that will be like relevant for them or that they will work on throughout the whole week. And then not only stopping there, basically, but already thinking about like post engagements, because also another area that we have seen was demanded quite often is on data analysis. But given the format of the seasonal school and quite the diversity of backgrounds of people, we felt that actually engaging with data analysis methods and data analysis tools, which can be sometimes quite technical and like you would need the use of a computer, for example. So we have thought about maybe having that as like a post engagement, maybe like a consecutive training module where people can actually engage with it over a longer time and really have like specific topics and specific tools selected that then like maybe a smaller selection of participants can engage in. Yeah, but that is, for example, planned as a follow-up with palm trees. If there are, maybe we can like collect questions to, or you can collect them in the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot see the chat, but maybe we can pick them up then later. Then the next one is the responsive fund. So we have additional funding for capacity strengthening that is in total 160,000, and we have thought more or less supporting 8 project ideas. All in the timeline until end of this year, so December 2025. The deadline for the submission of expression of interest was end of January, and we have received 16 applications from a variety of projects. One of the focuses that we wanted to put was on cross-project collaborations, and about 1/3 of the applications are in that area, like really collaborations between projects, while the other projects are just for one, while the other applications are just from one project, but include several institutions. So even though not necessarily between projects, but at least like between the institutions that collaborate under one project. And yeah, so we have received so expression of interest where the applicant had to indicate like a 250-word paragraph. Looking a little bit into what was applied for, so to say. So overall, the topics were quite diverse, but I tried to summarize them or like see a little bit what the areas that were mentioned. So what came up several times was in relation to gender theory. So some of the projects related asked for training in, for example, concepts around gender, like ecofeminism, but also other gender transformative approaches. And that was specifically for other researchers that have been part of a project. Maybe they joined in a little bit later. Maybe they felt like these different concepts were relevant for their work. So that was one area. The other one is, for example, that fall more in the category of agriculture and climate change. And here I called it for beneficiaries that include maybe other policymakers that are somehow related to the project, but also farmers. So not necessarily the researchers themselves, but for example, training them in using climate information, some principles around climate risk insurance, circular agriculture and sustainable rangeland management. And then the last one, which I particularly liked, is in the area of harmonizing approaches across projects. So basically, when projects have been working in the same area, but have been conducting, for example, different climate risk assessment, there was a demand to streamline that and maybe fostering exchange between them and maybe coming up with a joint approach or a joint tool. Yeah, and as I've said, there were some like mostly in the area of climate risk assessment or also community-based adaptation. For 2 of the applications, we assessed them to be a little bit out of the scope that we had envisioned. One was more leaning towards how finances for climate information provision, how that could be streamlined. And the other one was in really like physically planning, but also implementing flood defenses, which is a little bit beyond our scope, because of course that like if it comes to like infrastructure development, that is you would need a lot more resources to do so. So we actually have to see on the one hand whether we go back to the projects and see and how far they want to tweak it to give it a little bit more of a capacity strengthening twist. But another idea, of course, would be also like to discuss it with them and maybe together with the PO, whether there would be other funding modalities to support these endeavors when they really see the need for what they have applied for. Maybe there are other resources available, but yeah, we felt that these were not so much in line with the responsive fund. Overall, the learner, as I've put earlier, a lot of addressees were like beneficiaries, but also ECRs have been mentioned quite often, which is interesting to see because that has been already a focus that we had also in the past and with the seasonal school, but somehow also it continues to play a role also in these applications. Some of the modalities evolve mostly around like training or training of trainers. There, I think what is important to us that it is not necessarily a one-off training because often the impacts of these are quite limited. So only having the exposure once to a sometimes maybe even a completely new topic. So we really want to see how can we combine it maybe with different modalities, maybe having a training and then mentoring or like other just like follow-ups that it's not like this one standalone training. Also to see and how far training of trainers is possible because of course it's a different scope whether you're just like exposed to the topic or you actually like learn it and internalize it as much that you can actually replicate it and train other people. But yeah, these were some of the modalities mentioned. And overall, I think one of the observations was also that some were quite ambitious. And I think we have to see, and I will come to that in a second, like to go in a conversation with them and then see what is actually feasible, or then also at one point maybe or consult with the project officer and see maybe if we top it up or like what like how we react to it. Basically, this is a little bit the timeline that we have envisioned. So as I said, now we had the review of the expression of interest, like reviewing them in view of eligibility. Now we have started so-called design support calls, that is with the applicant and one CSAP member. That is basically to streamline the understanding and like get on the same page on what they want to do and what we can support from the responsive fund. We have now started to engage with 6 and then also want to do like a little bit of an internal reflection. How these design support calls are working, are they really useful? What can the participant take from them? Is it a good support also for them? And then see how we go ahead, but then basically would invite the applicants to the concept note development where they add like more additional information because of course the like a 250 word abstract is quite like has its boundaries, has its limits and what kind of information you can include. And then it would come to the review of the concept note. So we will form a review committee and there also we will consult with the project officers. That is a little bit the plan. Very shortly, and I don't know in how far you have discussed that together with Shannon already, but we are collaborating with the GI working group for the additional funding, the 300,000, where the applications can come in on a rolling basis because the CSAP will be managing the funding and the what do you say? Yeah, I'll leave it at that. We will manage the funding. Currently, there are 4 concept notes submitted, as you can see here on the right, and we are closely collaborating with Shannon and other ACTS colleagues how we can get the funding underway. And then after that, I stop. Last but not least, one of the topics that is keeping us quite engaged is the labs approaches across CLARE. So there have been quite a broad interest. I think on the knowledge management platform in the subgroup, I think there are currently 40 colleagues involved, and we are leading this endeavor like in close collaboration with the R4I Hub. We have asked, I will now call it maybe a working group. So we have asked the working group what they want to engage in and what would be their interest. And it came out that they would be interested in peer learning. So we are organizing like monthly peer learning sessions where they can share their work on the labs, what they have done, what are the challenges, what are the stakeholders involved, etc. But also to deepen on our understanding a bit more on what do we mean when we talk about labs? Is it more like we compare apples and pears, or do we compare apples and cucumbers, and what can be actually the learnings between those? So we'll also be engaging in a like writing in a learning paper and looking more into the typology of labs. And then yeah, we have the 2 adaptation future submissions that also like touch upon the labs. I stop there. Maybe we will talk about a little bit more about the submissions towards the end, but would now pass over to Joel.
Yeah, thanks, Alana, for that bit. So we started this in sort of like what we have been doing and the different things that align to the original objectives of CS Hub. And we reflected this in a 3-day strategy meeting, where I think is the first time that the entire team from the CS Hub was actually in the same space. The only missing person, I think, was Heidi and Manuela, in the sense that for this to be the CES Hub, we have this nexus of the CLARE team. But we did this with an external consultant from the Partnership Brokers Association, with the idea that their look of things might also be based on experience of partnership health tech, but also give us some insights into what it means to be able to work better together. And also thinking about it as an experience that can also be shared further with other projects, with other colleagues that are in that space when it comes to partnership brokerage. We focused on the principles of collaboration. I think in many ways it was like, okay, what have we been doing? How has it been working? How do we build that further? We realized that from the onset that our partnership wasn't in a bad state. And we eventually, of course, you see there the overall health score of 7 out of 10. We're doing very well. One of the things that emerged, and I think this was associated a lot with the fact that we are working in three partners, 2 that are more implementing on a day, and the third that is, is doing advisory. So how do we envisage that working, and how do we make sure that that kind of synergy actually applies? And this actually cuts across to what we are discussing, why we are doing the session today, because then how do we engage the POs? How do we bring together the product layer team into this collaboration, so that then the principles of how we work, but also how we're able to engage in decision making, in our different ways of pursuing the general objective of the CS Hub. I think that was one of the aspects, which meant that we needed to think of, re-strategize on what we consider to be a good position for the capacity strengthening hub, and also a good position for Plan, Adapt, and Act to work together, considering this was the first time we were working together. So we figured that our hardware was, needed a bit of adjustment along the way. Into the next bit, so based on this, we also reflected on how this position we are in affect what we think about when you're thinking about beyond June and in the CS Hub, what you're calling 2.0. And we realize that how we've conceptualized different things, how we have been able to think about what capacity strengthening really is, has to be central to what we think about when we are considering the next step. Of course, the focus a lot has been on research capacity, whether you're thinking about research capacity from the nuances of how to do research, the methods of doing research, but also how to legitimize research in the context that we work in, whether it's inclusivity, equity issues. And we have done we have used different modalities to get into some of these conversations. But you also know the flip side is that research capacity also comes research for impact capacity. So how are we building capacity for people to be able to convert research to impact? And considering that this research capacity, or rather capacity that we are focusing on, applies at different levels, from individual to organization to systemic. And in the broader scheme of things, there's a lot of overlaps within it. What is individual, what goes to organization, what goes to systemic, and how do we then synergize and reduce parallels when you're thinking about capacity strengthening? So this conceptual thinking and is what made us start thinking about how do we design the next bit of CS Hub, and being advised very ably with the context that I think we have been trying to look at, that capacity strengthening would have different perspectives, that any capacity strengthening, and as Alana was presenting about the different analysis of the responsive fund submissions, is realized that she was talking about the learner, who's going to be doing this, benefiting from this. Why are we talking about, which capacities are we reflecting, and how would what modalities are out there? We realize that, for example, from the responsive fund, a lot of the modalities are either trainings or training of trainers. And we are thinking about how do we accelerate this? How do we move towards towards a better positioning into the next space, which then we are looking at. This nexus allows us to prioritize. We are doing a lot of work together with the IHub and other working groups. So the question is, how do we prioritize? Do we prioritize by the learner? Do we prioritize by capacities? Which capacities are more implementable and supported from a project perspective, and which ones could the CS Hub actually take up? What's the balance between the capacity strengthening hub capacity modality and what we could consider as, from the other working groups? So this framed our discussions and thinking about how we can then use this framing based on the conceptualization to come up with areas of work. And this then leads us to what we are thinking about into the next step. And we are thinking about this into 4 main outcome areas. The first one is when we have the CS Hub functioning well and is well connected, especially bridging the gap with the working group members and the focal points, then we'll be looking at a CLARE committee that is more together, but also fosters capacity strengthening. The second bit, and I think this is central to the work, is about capacity strengthening, strengthening the capacity to do research. And we're looking at capacity to do research in 2 elements. Research capacity, so can I do the research? Can I do it well within the legalities or the legitimacy required that I have? But also, can I convert this research into impact? And this space of capacity strengthening, this has been, I think, it's taken more than half of the current initiatives that we are doing to pursue capacity strengthening as part of outcome area 2. The third outcome area that you're thinking about is a lot looked at as a space for us to innovate. And this is thinking about how do we support capacity strengthening projects, or even capacity strengthening within different research projects, get a better design and enhance their own innovation within capacity strengthening. This would basically, we're thinking as this is an element that goes into what we could consider, for example, the responsive fund support that you're offering, the perspective of the GI fund that we are also building towards. And this is, I would say, instrumental if you are to think about capacity strengthening moving forward and in the longer term. We see the aspect of sustainability to be cutting across the first and the last objectives. But also, if you look at the focal points learning, the projects, the monitoring and evaluation of capacity strengthening, these would be elements that would be made central to what you're looking at as outcome area 3. The fourth outcome area is what we could consider our learning agenda. And the learning agenda here is basically, in the last months, we have gathered a lot of insights, whether it's through the training sessions, monitoring, or getting feedback and talking to different projects bilaterally and also as part of the working group. And certain things are emerging as demand areas. So how are we documenting this so that we can be able to understand the optimal way of engaging, learning, and also innovating within the capacity strengthening hub, but also within the CLARE program? Importantly, that bits and what we've also gathered so far, for example, from the responsive fund experience, is that it does enhance our understanding when you're thinking about capacity strengthening. And this leveraging of outcome area 4, I think, is very important for our learning agenda. And finally, when you're thinking about our next steps, is that we want to be able to, we've gotten a lot of information as part of our learning, and we want to consolidate this in some kind of a landscape analysis that focuses on the demand. Basically, what will the projects and the CLARE portfolio team are looking at in terms of capacity strengthening demand areas, but also what are the projects offering that we do not have to sort of do again, and how we can prioritize that. We think that with doing this would allow us to prioritize certain outcome areas and activities that are looking at the time that we have left, but also things that think about sustainability. We see an opportunity to synergize, especially with the R4I Hub, and we are thinking about organizing a set of meetings to discuss different areas of work and modalities that we have. And we have also explored the opportunity to bring external experts, what we could look about, thought leaders in the capacity strengthening and climate resilience adaptation and climate resilience adaptation research, because then we can start thinking about what is working in the ecosystem beyond the CLARE portfolio, but what is working in the ecosystem with this, based on these expert views. And we are thinking about, putting together a list of experts that we could have smaller conversations with. We see a really good opportunity and, of course, regularity of having this conversation with the CLARE program officers, that we can be able to foster some very good ways of work and streamline how we move forward with the activities that we're doing without leaving any of the projects behind. And of course, central to our work is how we work with the capacity strengthening focused projects. And this CS focus projects, some of them have already started, others we're already convening different engagements with, but others are, of course, starting soon, and we should go to see how we integrate one of the things you are calling the adopter project idea, which focuses on how do we onboard, but also streamline the actions between the CS Hub and the CS Focus project. I think that's all from our presentation. We will be happy to get questions, but also we also have questions of our own based on what we have thought about. But we'll just post these two, even as you come up with questions that when you're working with the different projects as program officers, are there needs that are emerging that were unexpected or that were not planned for in the beginning? And how do you imagine this being delivered in terms of capacity or modalities? But the other bit that is also important to us is that if you're looking at the learning agenda for the capacity strengthening hub, what would be your area of interest that you'd be curious about to facilitate learning within the capacity strengthening space? I think that's it, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Joel and Elena. I don't know, Bruce, shall I facilitate? We hadn't really talked about who would play that role today. I'm happy to do that unless we want to pass that over to someone else.
Happy to have you facilitate, but also feel free to appoint someone else if you also want to participate and not only facilitate.
Okay, I think I can do both. Really good to get that update. Manuela, do you want to, maybe we could put the first slide up just since Manuela missed the start and the update on the seasonal school. And wonderful if you could.
Joel, send me the slide. Thank you, Joel.
Oh, okay, great.
I can
Oh,
open
great.
it up,
Okay.
so.
Okay, good. Yeah, maybe to start, does anybody have any questions about what the colleagues just presented? And then we'll make time that we go back to the questions that they're posing us as well. So maybe you could go to that first slide with the agenda just to review many topics covered in your presentation. So yeah, we talked about the seasonal school coming up, this responsive fund, along with the GI funding, the labs approaches, the partnership health check, and then the sort of next stage of work for the CS Hub that they're planning. Any colleagues have any questions from any of that? Manuela, go ahead.
Can I? I'm muted again. Great. Quickly, my question was on slide the kind of the framing slide, it's just I wasn't clear whether the questions that you put in terms of the framing the discussion is something that you're already starting to see some of the answers. Or is it, sorry, can you
Is that the
because
last slide, the questions they're having for us?
no, the slides 12 and 13, talking about the framing our discussion around the capacity strengthening. So you explained that these are the elements that frame the discussion. And in the terms of outcome areas 13, is that what you found, or that's what your hypothesis? The following slide, sorry, in terms of outcome areas.
So yeah, we are seeing this as some of the elements that are guiding us towards getting to the outcome areas. And we've already started using this framing because as Alana presented that this, even when you're looking at the responsive fund submissions, who are the learners, what capacities are they looking at, which modalities, because then we did realize that framing capacity strengthening in this sense also allows us to think about what is innovative, what's different in some sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and the outcome area are the kind of your hypothesis that you are kind of what you hope to achieve. So I guess my question is how far in your understanding of the project you are to be able to give an early assessment of whether projects are strengthen the capacity or approaches are, especially the point number 3 about the project capacity approach are well designed, inclusive and enhance how the leadership. I'm asking that because answering this question now is important to course correct the projects. Answering this question in 6 months' time, it means that it can inform the phase of CLARE, but there is very little possibility that informs current projects, given where projects are.
Yeah, so one of the things that we wanted to try and start answering that question is this landscape assessment that we want to do, or rather that we are doing, because that landscape assessment is preliminary, giving us an indication of how well a project CS activity is designed and how are they enhancing the actual capacity of Southern leadership, but also inclusivity. We have already seen some of the, for example, if we look at the responsive fund submissions, which is also a source of our information, that a lot of the projects tend towards specific modalities or specific, how could we call it, learners that they are working with. For example, a lot of attention is given to ECRs, and is ECR target the optimal? Then that's the underlying question, because I think in the CLARE Asia, there was also a question raised about mid-career professionals and researchers. What is their room for this? We're already seeing this demand area going towards early career researchers and some of the thinking about beneficiaries. So of course, we are reflecting in the sense that we have some information that can allow us evaluate the level at which projects are actually able to design their capacity strengthening approaches and whether these approaches are actually taking care of the current demand. And so we are trying to put that together in this demand analysis that we are currently doing. So we have some reflections on this. Alana, I don't know if you want to chime in to this as well.
Yes, thank you, Joel. Yeah, that is definitely an important moment. What we also did, but it's already a while ago, so it would be maybe also thinking about when we can do that again. With the last, I think it was in last June, when many of the projects reported also on their capacity strengthening activities, we had a look at the report, specifically at like the sections that relate to capacity strengthening, and we pulled that together. I would need to go back to the presentation because that was one of the topics we had in the capacity strengthening working group. So we actually like combined some of the analysis, the results. So we had also seen like which projects had, I think there were quite some differences in view of like one of the projects had like 16 capacity strengthening activities already, while others had maybe only 2. And then we opened the conversation for like the working group to discuss what worked well, what didn't, etc. And I think they're collaborating quite closely with the MEL, maybe with the MEL focal points overall. Also, I mean, with you, Haley, we have also had some conversations back then to see and how far the projects are on track.
Sorry, Manuela, did you have a follow-up?
Sorry, I keep muting and unmuting myself. Just as a quick follow-up, how then the findings are going to, whether the findings are going to influence the course of projects or activities within projects, given the timing, given where projects are on now, they have about maybe 16 months to wrap up everything they're doing. And what's the process for that? And I'm supposed to know, so maybe I don't know if it's a question for Heidi and Hailey rather than for the CSR, but it's just thinking about, we found those things for project, how they're going to fit into the project, or maybe that's the responsive fund is also a way to do that. Sorry, maybe it's a very stupid question, I should know the answer.
No, I don't think it's a stupid question, and I think it comes back to the different roles of engagement and moments of engagement and sort of focus of engagement that we each play with respect to the projects, right? And this is where I think the collaboration is something we can discuss further, because as program officers, we're monitoring specific projects, but all the elements, right? Not just the capacity strengthening piece, and we get that technical reporting and we're picking up on the particular pieces. Whereas the CS Hub, there's the focal points that attend for the working group and have that particular interest on capacity strengthening, but play various roles within their project teams, right? I know the Capacity Strengthening Hub has had specific engagement with the projects, more in depth, and others probably less so. So I think this is an area where I think it's a discussion that we should actually have together. Like, how do we bring the perspective from the Capacity Strengthening Hub into our engagements with the particular project teams? I'd be interested to hear, Alana, Joel, your thoughts, and then some of the program officers too, your reflections or your thoughts.
Yeah, maybe one of the perspectives has been that the working group is one of the really good vehicles, actually, avenues to which we are doing this. So when we have the working group conversations, it's often about update, but also co-creation. And we see that every time we are doing co-creation, there is some level of learning that then is cascaded to the projects. And some of the demand areas that we are getting also comes through the working group. Of course, there are others that come through conversations, the project. And I feel like that moment to see whether we're actually designing for now or designing for the future for capacity strengthening is a lot aligned with what we get from the projects, like what we get from the working group conversations, what we get when we have, like when you had the knowledge brokerage conversation, there are areas that emerged, areas that required synergy. And of course, that evolved into the lab approaches, for example. We had the GI session, sort of workshop in Gali. Again, the emerging areas of conversation. I think this is also moving towards the GI fund, what we're calling fund. So we have opportunity to innovate as they go. And I think the responsive fund is a good space for us to do that. And sometimes also the peer learning sessions, some projects are able to pick up what is happening that is better, that they can include in their own projects. We are also, like specialized community of practice, that the lab approach, people who are interested in the lab approaches are now having an opportunity to explore what the performance of one or the other lab approach works and what are the pros and cons of it. So having the moments that, emerge in capacity strengthening in meetings and workshops are actually becoming very, very useful. We see that the idea that the demand, for example, or the priority for data analysis or data collection was emerging from the ECR is almost like maybe this is not something the projects are doing. And then we have to decide whether this is something that requires individual, organizational, or systemic kind of input. Yep, that would be my reflection. Learn, but
basically I've put my response in the chat, that I think that there are several vehicles, like you said, Joel, through the responsive fund, but also the working group bilateral engagements, but also through these co-designing of activities. But yeah, like feeding back in a way of what works well, what have the projects learned, etc. That will be an integral part of the learning agenda, how I envision it.
Manuel, I see you're writing questions in the chat. Also want to make sure we have time for those questions that Joel and Alana posed. So maybe we can go back to that slide and to hear from some of the POs who have been less engaged, either not, less engaged in the capacity strengthening working group or aren't in these conversations that I have regularly with the CS Hub. What are you hearing from your teams, or what information do you feel like would be most useful to know about so that you can support the work that the CS Hub is doing or input, in particular, the responsive fund. We've been talking together with Elena and Joel, like how do POs come in to look at those applications coming in that involve their project teams? How much do you feel it will be important to be involved in reviewing those ideas, inputting on those ideas, and understanding what's being proposed by the teams? And sorry, Alana, we see the outcome area slide. Maybe you could go back to that slide with your questions. I don't want to pick on anybody, but Michele or Evelyn or Mercy, Haley, any thoughts?
Well, not really right now. I'm trying to digest everything, but yeah, I'm not ready to say anything specific.
Okay,
But I'm thinking. Thanks.
thanks. Go ahead, Haley.
Yeah, I can come in. I feel like I have a bit more opportunity to engage with CS Hub folks, so do just cut me off if others have questions too. I think, yeah, so we can see in the M&E data more at the activity level, kind of what's actually happening in projects. It would be really interesting to hear from you. It doesn't have to be right here today, but whether there are we know we have the capacity strengthening focus projects. Are there research projects that you see as like particularly taking really innovative approaches to capacity strengthening, and maybe along with that idea of along the research to impact continuum, so with different actors or users? I'd just be curious to hear your perspective, whether there are any really interesting cases that I'm sure we can see it in the M&E data to some extent, but because it is activity level, it might not be as clear as the perspective you have. And yeah, I mean, maybe that relates to the learning agenda question as well. Like, are there and maybe this is similar to what Bruce is saying, are there kind of promising cases or cases we can be learning from your perspective, and sharing maybe a bit more in the CLARE community on that? But I'll stop there in case others want to come in.
Thanks, Haley. I think this is a question for all of us actually, but I don't know if Alana or Joel, you know, any projects come to mind that you see as being particularly innovative? And then if POs, if you also have other ideas.
Yeah, perhaps I could share one modality that for ecogenesis. So they initially recruited research fellows as part of their work, and then they had internal research methods training. And based on that, after they had the internal sessions, they also tapped into what I would call coaching. So they are working with different individuals who are more advanced and they're able to mentor, sort of mentorship program to these researchers. And the research fellows have been able to develop certain concepts and tools, and now they are implementing these tools. Of course, they started this from place to place. So they did a bit in Tanzania, I think, and now the fellows that were part of that process are joining in the seasonal school to learn something different. So critical thinking perspectives. So what I'm giving this an example because they practice different modalities to enhance the capacity of the fellows within the program. But some of these were not initially planned. To best of my understanding, when we were speaking to them in the beginning, their capacity strengthening plan was, well, we'll train a few people. We have an idea, but then they didn't look at the internal capacity of their actual teams to do this. So I think this could be considered a good example of where different modalities have been used, separate from what could be considered sort of training, for example, which is the common modality that you've seen across, training here, training there, but using alternative modalities of, coaching, aspects of mentorship and hand-holding for early career researchers is something. I acknowledge the questions from Bruce, and I think that there are different ways that different projects are actually looking at this. As Alana said before, we did some initial analysis of which modalities are happening where, and we ended up with a lot of the projects were doing some kind of training, most of it at individual capacity. And then the question we had was, okay, how are these individual capacity strengthening initiatives building towards organizational capacity and the gap? And I think even earlier this week at the CS Hub, we were thinking about what is our role as a CS Hub to add value to the systemic transformation when it comes to capacity strengthening. So we see an opportunity that CS Hub will think about capacity strengthening that sort of are in the space between individual and organizational kind of space, because then that has a space for longer term influence, not just for the individual, but also for future organizational development perspective.
Thanks, Joel. I'm seeing the time is short for this meeting. With only 5 minutes left. I think it would be great to if others have other ideas of projects and their innovative capacity strengthening approaches. Feel free to share them even following this meeting. I mean, I think about the Urbanize project and part of the work they're doing on assessing the strengths and challenges and supporting the institutional capacity of the Homeless People's Federation of the Philippines as quite unique in that project sense. They're both a partner in the project, but that has an objective of really strengthening that group's work with their stakeholder groups far into the future. So that one's quite unique in my mind. Um, um, and your encouragement there, Bruce, well noted, on documenting some of this and sharing some of this. Alana, your hand is up. Do you want to come steer us back to some of these questions that you had in the last slide or contribute your thoughts?
Yes, just two very shortly. I think what, like, not necessarily, well, what we would call maybe innovative approaches, but at least success. They're doing a lot of activities and capacity strengthening for early career researchers. So there will be definitely, there's, I think, a lot of learning potential. And then just one of the other examples, and that will also relate to the session that we're preparing um, for the adaptation futures, is more targeting like the arts-based approaches. And I think some of them have been used in a variety of labs. Just for example, Enact comes to mind. I think they're using a lot of different arts-based approaches in trainings, etc., and like in planning processes. So these will be particularly interesting and now like getting picked up in the adaptation future submission. But yeah, I mean, I would be very happy from your perspective, basically, as we are now like putting together all the different information that we have gathered over the last like more than 1.5 years. But also if you have maybe a project in mind that we should particularly pay attention to, or like a capacity that has come up again and again in your exchanges with the project. So again, maybe coming back a little bit towards this, well, we call it the CSQ, which sometimes helps to like conceptualize capacity strengthening. But if there's a certain capacity or a modality or a learner that we should particularly pay attention to, of course, we would be super curious to hear and like possibly follow up or integrate it in our landscape analysis.
We have a couple more minutes. Is there anything, any needs or priorities coming out from your engagements with projects, CLARE colleagues, that you think would be important for Alana and Joel to know about as they're planning ahead to future work? I know some of you talked about, I mean, I know we're aware that some projects are having um, some challenges in their partnerships. So wonder if the partnership health check piece could be a complement to the discussions that are already taking place, or if as projects become more mature, if you see new priorities emerging, like around publication or thinking about how to package and share research results, etc. Anyway, if not during our meeting today, just know that the space is open and these colleagues are very open to hearing ideas coming forward from the team. Michele, is that your hand up, your finger
Yeah.
up?
Yeah, it's my hand. Yeah, I
Okay.
like to work 3D instead of with emoji and stuff like that. No, maybe it's not the right time to ask now, and we are right at the end. So, but I was wondering what I was curious to learn what's the thinking about the capacity strength sessions that we'll have in Lusaka. Bit more than that, how this is going to feed into the discussion we'll have in Lusaka, considering that we'll be all together then, and the projects will be participating. So we won't be discussing only about projects and about the project members, but we will be discussing with them. Yeah.
Let's put that on the agenda to return to in some of our conversations around CLARE Exchange. I think that's important, an important one to touch on. And even Joel, Alana, in our next conversation with the hub to hear about Maureen's thoughts that she's been inputting to the planning for CLARE Exchange, and just make sure we're bringing that back maybe to the working group as well. Good point. Thanks for engaging with us today. Please share some dispatches from the seasonal school. I think that will help those of us not attending to feel connected to the work that you're doing, connected to the people that you're engaging with, the discussions that are happening, and we'll be really looking forward to hearing impressions from and sort of the results of that work. And also, let's talk further about how and when to engage with POs around the responsive fund ideas that have come through, because I think POs have useful perspectives, and we'll also want to know how the teams are seeing gaps or opportunities, plus thinking about how they might be stretching their 24 hours of the day into other activities in relation to the core of their research work as well. Great. It was too short as usual, but we appreciated the update. Can you also please send the slides through, Alana, so that we can all refer back to them? That would be really helpful. Thanks for your time today, everyone. Thanks for sharing, Joel and Alana. And we look forward to the conversation next